Okay, welcome back to math class and welcome to 9-5. Up until this point in chapter 9, we've been looking at quadratic equations, figuring out solutions based on graphing. We've done a lot of things that have made us more acquainted with the quadratic equation, but they've all taken a long time as well. So I think you'll be excited to learn that today we're learning a specific formula that's going to expedite this process. It's going to make it a little bit easier. It might seem intimidating at first, but trust me, it's going to make this whole process a lot faster in the end. And that is called the quadratic formula. Basically, we've been working with our quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c, right? That's our quadratic equation. The quadratic formula is going to tell us our solutions to the equation. And it looks like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now that's a really long equation, but when we get to the end of it, we're going to have our two x values without having to graph it, without having to estimate, without having to plug in several points. We'll have figured it out. Now let's go step by step to practice one together. If I gave you the equation x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0. Okay, the first thing we need to take note of here is our a is 1 because there's nothing in front of the x. Our b is negative 2 and our c is negative 15. That's the first thing we need to take note of. Now we just plug each of those numbers into this equation where they go. So I'm going to put x equals, I was just about to copy this again. Here, x equals negative b, so negative 2, which is just 2, plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 15, and all of that over 2 times a, and a is 1. Okay, so now, again, looks really complicated, but we're just going to simplify it one step at a time. So we're going to start with what's under our radical. So we get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared, which is 4. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 15 is going to give us positive 60. All of that is over 2 times 1, which is 2. Hopefully you're tracking so far. We can simplify this a little bit more. X equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 64 all over 2. Now hopefully you can recognize that the square root of 64 is 8. So we're going to get x equals 2 plus or minus 8 over 2. Now what we do next is really important that you pay attention. Because I have plus or minus here, I'm going to have two solutions, and x is either going to equal 2 plus 8 over 2 or 2 minus 8 over 2. So our x equals either 2 plus 8 over 2 or 2 minus 8 over 2. So x equals 2 plus 8 is 10 divided by 2 is 5, or x equals 2 minus 8, which is negative 6 over 2, which is negative 3. Now I know this looks like a big scary equation, but just think how much faster I solved for x than when we had to graph a whole graph before. And the more you practice, the easier it's going to be to do these things. One thing I want to mention is, first of all, don't panic if you get to the end and this is a fraction. That's okay. And the next thing is, sometimes when you get to this stage, this number won't be a perfect square. And we're going to do a problem that's like that, just so that you guys can see. I'm going to leave that up there. All right, so one more example. 3x squared minus 2x minus 9. Okay, step 1 of this, equals 0. They must equal 0 in order to use the quadratic equation, because we're solving for our x-intercept, which is the place where y equals 0. Okay, so once I know that it's in the correct form and it equals 0, I can just go ahead and plug it in. So my a here this time is 3, my b is negative 2, and my c is negative 9. So I'm going to go x equals negative b, so negative negative 2, which is just 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times negative 9, which is my c. All of that over 2 times a, which is 3. Okay, so now we start simplifying. 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared, which will be 4, and then negative 4 times 3 is 12, times 9 is going to give us 108, and we have 2 negative signs, so a negative times a negative will give us a positive. All of that over 2 times 3, which is 6. Okay, so if I add those together, I'm going to get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 112 over 6. Now, something you might notice about 112 is that it's not a perfect square. We can't just take the square root and get a whole number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and split this up into its two functions, because remember, this plus or minus gives us an or. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here and say x equals 2 plus the square root of 112 over 6, or 2 minus the square root of 112 over 6. Once I've split it up into its two functions, then you can go ahead and just put them into your calculator. Make sure that you're rounding off to the nearest hundredth, and for this one you should get x equals, well, x is approximately, we use little squigglies when we mean about. It's about 2.10 or negative 1.43. And it's okay to use your calculator for the square roots that aren't perfect squares.